Brought to you by BedroomBattlefields.com, this is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. On this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast, we're off to Hungary to speak to Menyus, aka Granto, about the non-existent miniature game Card Jam that he ran over on the Rule of Carnage Discord. The challenge was simple but full of possibility. Design a card for a miniatures wargame that doesn't exist. And that card could be a unit stat card, a deployment card, a hidden objective, a weapon card, or a reminder card for some mechanic unique to your imaginary game. And it could lean on text, symbols, art, or any mix of the three. The only rule was that it had to feel like a real piece of a real tabletop miniature wargame, even though the game behind it was a figment of your imagination. Before we dive into the specifics of this game jam though, I wanted to ask Menyus about the concept of the game jam more broadly.
So, a game jam is when people have to make a very focused game within a very short time frame. The time frame might be different for different game jams depending on how intricate the end product the hosts want to be, or how intricate entries you have to make. So the more focused the theme and the theme and the more focused are the game mechanics, or the smaller games you have to create, the shorter is the time frame. But the idea is that you have to finish something and put something out for the world to see, just a little experimental project, which might turn into a full game or is already a full game in itself. You can do a lot with game jams.
What were the parameters of this particular one then?
So this was the non-existent miniatures game Card Jam. It was the name, and the goal was to create one singular card for a game that doesn't exist. So you had to communicate interesting mechanical bits, interesting gameplay stuff or narrative through one singular card. And that made it a very focused jam. It was the jam ran for 9 days. So a pretty short time frame, and any person could contribute any number of cards, but they all had to be for separate different games. So you could not expand on an idea. You had to do something and then move on if you want to create other stuff. So it really put people in a loop where they had all these weird ideas. And the great thing about that is you don't have to interpolate on it. So you don't have to finish your thought, but you kind of have to put out something that inspires others people to finish that thought for you. That was the best part of the top entries, I think, is that a lot of the cards, they are made for a game which doesn't exist, but people already could use them in basically any game with a small homebrewing.
Yeah. So before we get to the cards that you designed, what were some of the favourite cards you saw from other people?
So there was the card Unhallowed Path from Tom, also known as TP Games from Itch, who made this trap card which you lay on the battlefield, and when units move onto it, it might trigger based on their action. And if it triggers, it traps them, so they cannot move off. That is one entry that I really liked. There was also Fortress Bastard, which is a character card. It was made by Siliastov, is the Itch name. It's a character card, but it really uses a sort of Morkborg-esque layout design and very intuitive keywords. So it has a lot of interesting artistic stuff and also a lot of inspiring keywords on it. That's I also very like. I also loved Chaos Reigns by Alexei Vella. It was a card which kind of reminded me of Chaos Confetti. Are you familiar with Magic the Gathering?
No, I don't know a lot about it. No.
So there was this card there called Chaos Orb, which in the very early days of Magic, where they kind of were brave enough to experiment like with one-off ideas, and you had to throw Chaos Orb from a certain distance above the table, and the cards it landed on were destroyed. That was Chaos Orb. So the legend was that some people started to tear apart their Chaos Orbs just to hit as many cards as possible. So later, when they introduced these joke sets in Magic the Gathering, they made one card called Chaos Confetti, which was a version of Chaos Orb which stated that you have to tear it apart and throw it that way.
Yeah.
So Chaos Reigns is pretty similar. It also has kind of a ritualistic theme to it. Alexei Vella has a lot of he can create a lot of theme by just simple keywords, and how he uses it. He's really a master of that. And you have to cut or tear this card apart, throw it onto the battlefield, and pieces that touch miniatures get either healed or damaged based on your choice.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was one entry that I really loved. There was also one called Fate, which was based on a fortune cookie series. That fortune cookie which also has a set of lottery numbers on it, and there it got translated into wargame stat modifiers. The layout of it almost feels like an old school D&D stat line. So you really get a feeling of, oh, this is a movement stat, this is a to hit statistic, this is a movement statistic, just because of how it's laid out and the markings around the numbers. It is a very interesting product. I I already started to look up fortune cookie recipes to make some to play a game where we have fortune cookies and the different modifiers, and then we open up fortune cookies during the game and apply these fates modifiers onto them. So yeah, that's also one I really want to try out. There was also Badly Drawn Character, which was a contribution between Alexei Vella and Phantasmal, which the idea is that you draw your character on the card, randomly roll for their abilities, and then just turn the card, fold the card. So the art part stands upright, and the flat card, there are stats written on the card that lies flat on the table, and the art sticks up, and that is your miniature. So the card itself is the miniature as well, and you have to draw a character onto it. That's also a pretty great idea, and so characterful. I also loved Vector from Alexei Vella again, which was this card that you also have to fold, and you either place it in front of a miniature as a shield, or you face it in front of an enemy miniature as an arrow, and then you flick it at the miniature and see if you hit.
Yeah.
So it's either a tearing piece or basically a damage effect. And I also loved the Succu Battle from Phantasmal, which was again a monster or character card. It just had great art, great theme. How you operate with keywords. You get a sense to that this card is part of an army which has synergies inside of it. That also I really love that idea that you see one card and you also you immediately want to create a whole army around it.
Yeah.
Because the synergy is built into that one statistic card. That's a great idea. But that was also one of the top 3 cards altogether in the game jam, is Commeling Jangler card made by Marginalia Miniatures, which is sort of like this character or event. It's more like an event card, where players trade anything. They can trade anything, but the winner takes all. So everything just puts in, offers some of their stuff. What their stuff isn't really specified on the card. So I guess it could be units, it could be wounds, it could be effects, spells, abilities, and then they roll off, and the winner, or that might not even be specified how the winner is decided, but it's declared that the winner will take all. So that's also a very interesting card, and again, it kind of already tells you by how it's worded that it's supposed to be a part of a multiplayer game, um, and reflects this very chaotic event. I really love it.
Any more that you wanted to shout out before chatting about your own ones?
Well, these were my favorites. But one thing that I want to tell, that the personal ratings were all over the place during this game jam. So every entry grabbed someone's attention and became their favorite, because there were so many great ideas in there, and every entry spoke someone at a personal level enough that it became their personal favorite. The ratings were really close because of this, because the entries were great, and yeah, I even love those that I had to give like 3 stars to, because I had to differentiate between the entries, but so many great ones turned out for this jam.
Yeah. So what was it that you created yourself then?
My games were, I made one called Looking Glass, which is basically a terrain setup generator that tells you how to print out any map in a given scale. It has a table to help you find the perfect scale for your map to print it out in. And then you cut a window on the card, and you look up the place, or you determine where you want to play your miniatures war game in, and you can set up based on what's inside the window. That was one of my entries. I also had one called Dragon Tomb Flameberg, which was a weapons card. And the interesting part in it, I wanted to do some really flexible keywords. I also wanted to invoke the sense that you can kind of build an army around this card. But I also experimented with building the range onto the card itself. So the card became a range ruler as well. And this way, you can have very dynamic ranges for weapons. I a lot of the times I am interested in, these not full inch distances within war games. I think you can do so much more if you discard the numbers and just specify distances with weird lengths with templates. So it was also about that. I also had an entry called Engagement Range and Push Template, which assumed a system where every attribute of a combatant is given by a length, not by a number. And it's a card which contains a guide to construct your own template. And based on the attributes of the character, this engagement template can become vastly different. So more sturdy, more heavy hitters have a wider but shorter engagement range, while more agile characters with presumably with piercing weapons, have an engagement range that is longer to the front, but less wide. So that was another idea that I had. I also have one called Daylight Shadows Gauge, which is a template to measure shadow during the daylight for sneaky characters to hide in. It's also a card which operates as a template on the game. And I also had Swinging Lock Trap, which was inspired by the video game Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. It's again a card which you have to cut out and then place on the battlefield, and it moves to the other side of a point during each round and pushes miniatures out of the way, like, a swinging lock trap would act on the battlefield.
Yeah. What did you feel you learned the most from this process?
Basically, I wanted to experiment with new graphical styles more than mechanical stuff. I already had some ideas for the mechanics that I wanted to experiment with. Making something final out of those snippets was a very good learning experience, but what I enjoyed the most was the graphical process of creating the cards. I basically returned to this very old school kind of putting together a rule book, or in this case a card, like how the old Warhammer books or even old D&D books were created, by photocopying different text, cutting out, different text boxes, gluing them onto paper, and then photocopying them together to create one finished layout. That was the process. That was my process during this game jam as well. And I wanted to try it for a long time, and it created some very interesting results, some very good textures, like, it kind of fits this hobby where we create stuff with our hands and move away from the computer screen. So these photocopied text that you kind of hand out to people, hey, play with this, try this out, fits the theme of war games, I think.
What about Visions of War, which I saw a video of Glenn from the Rule of Carnage opening up a package that you'd sent him. Was Visions of War, did that come from a separate game jam?
Yes. Visions of War was my first released game, and I made it for Game Jam. It was actually made, the main host of that Game Jam was Siliastov, who made the one of my favorite entries for the card jam as well. So, small community. It was called the Flooded Jam. So the theme there, you had to create a game around the idea of a flood, but it was very vaguely defined what the flood means. And for a long time, I had this idea about a game where I basically recreate these Warhammer arts on the table, where the battle is very dense. It's like a mosh pit of units. There is no a spare inch on the ground beneath the feet of those warriors. You can't see anything but heads and shoulders and pikes and swords and weapons and flags just jutting out right to the horizon, and the two armies just in this dense melee on the image. So I wanted to recreate this feeling because I felt weird that you see these kinds of arts in the Warhammer books, and then you bring your miniatures to the table, and it becomes these huge bubbles just floating around in an empty battlefield and clashing together from time to time. It's a very different game visually than those arts. So I wanted to recreate this. That was my main idea. And I was interested in, okay, but how can I make this, putting miniatures close to each other is something that is very finicky in realistically, when you have to kind of move a miniature and you don't have the space for it, it can be infuriating. So the game quickly became more about setup and not moving miniatures, but placing miniatures. And then if the game is about placing miniatures, then how you place the miniatures must be important. That was the next step in the design process. And finally, it led to a game which became this cooperative diorama builder where you have to represent vague visions kept secret by the other player. So you have to find out or figure out their visions and complete them and work together to complete as many visions as possible on the battlefield while your miniatures in the narrative clash and fight.
What was the reception like when you put it out?
Well, the hardest thing, now is being visible in this very active indie war game creating scene. So the people who saw it really loved it. So they liked it very much. It is a weird game. I will not lie about that. It is a weird game because it's cooperative. It's a small footprint game, but you have to bring a lot of miniatures for it. Deceptively many, like a full fantasy army. And it seems short, but it's actually not short, and it has so many weird things about it because there is very little movement. There is one movement during each game. So a lot of weirdness is crammed into that one game, but those who will get through the rulebook and play it, they all enjoyed it. So the reception was pretty good.
Yeah.
What I also found out is a lot of the times miniature games designers are more excited by it than just those who want to play a game, those who like to homebrew and just experiment with stuff and create their own stuff, which is a huge part of the wargaming community because you have to put so much of yourself into that game, into this genre to even start to play a game. But yeah, those people who expect a boxed game set with miniatures and everything, those are interested in less, I think, than those who really want to make the game theirs.
What are you working on right now then?
Ooh, I have a lot of projects always. I'm still in the cathartic feeling of finishing the game jam, even though several weeks has passed since it ended, even the results were closed. But I'm still in this space when I return to old ideas, tinker with more of them simultaneously. I also returned to my first game idea that I really wanted to make, which made me join the Rule of Carnage community. It's basically a very dynamic combat system. It started out as a fan-made tabletop war game of a video game called Elderborn. It's like this small video game, but I also built a lot of Dark Messiah of Might and Magic into it because that's one of my favorite video games of all times. That has very dynamic combat, and it's all about the environment. So it really fits miniature war games, because it's really about positioning and pushing your opponents into deadly terrain and stuff like that. So I have that game idea, and I spend most of my game design time with that one nowadays.
Could you tell me about a time the hobby genuinely helped you through something difficult?
Well, after a long time ago, I had a very difficult breakup, and I wasn't wargaming back then, but I was playing Magic the Gathering, and I started painting extended art Magic the Gathering cards, and it really, it was a great time to extended art Magic the Gathering cards is when you pick up brush and you mix paint in a way that you make the borders and the text, some of the text disappear, and you perfectly match the colors on the art of the card. So you basically can create full art cards. Some people leave some texts, some names or some icons on the card to appear, but I created completely full art cards out of Magic the Gathering cards. And this process really helps you just sit down, get into it, but also you are left to yourself and have a lot of time to think about stuff. And this painting process is what eventually led me to painting miniatures.
Yeah, talk us through that process then, because I take it this is kind of your origins of getting into the miniature side of the hobby.
Well, what I wanted to create for Magic the Gathering is I wanted to make a 100 card deck that is only has full art cards, and it's a single tone deck, so no cards appear twice. Only a single copy is allowed for any card, except for basic lands. But even for basic lands, I used different arts, so no two cards were the same in the deck. And I started to build that, and I enjoyed this painting process. And even at that time, I was eyeing up, Warhammer. I was thinking about getting into the hobby, but I hesitated. I first started out playing Dungeons and Dragons. That was also a great thing for me, something that completely modified how I think about games and playing at the table. I was a very competitive player as a kid. I was a lonely child, so we can be a lot of the time we can be more selfish and harder to play against in these scenarios. But Dungeons and Dragons really showed me how to enjoy the narrative side of gaming. So very quickly I became a dungeon master or games master for role playing games, and then I find that was my chance to start collecting miniatures,
Yeah.
uh, and the early Age of Sigmar was perfect for that because rules were available for any miniature for free on the website, so you could just buy a miniature and use their rule right on the table anytime. And these two hobbies are interlinked, I think, inherently interlinked. It's not surprising because as a dungeon master, you put your boss miniature down, on the table once, your players kill it, everyone is happy, but you want to use that also miniature more than once. So miniature wargaming really lets you do that.
What is the general state of play with the hobby in Hungary?
Well, I mostly play with my friends. I don't really get out to the wide community, and that's mostly because I feel like this is a small country, this is a niche hobby. Put that together, and you have a very small community. And I feel like most of them stick to the most mainstream games because they fear that if they move towards the smaller indie game, they will never find themselves another player to play against or play with. So it's hard in that sense. But since my games are really made for myself and my friend group, I am not afraid to create games that are for people that have a very specific expectation about wargaming. I am happy with creating a niche within a niche within a niche. So I can play a lot with my friends, fortunately.
Well, it's been a brilliant chat. I've really enjoyed it. I've loved hearing about your experiences with these game jams and the stuff you've created, and a bit more about your hobby more broadly as well. Where would you like to point the listener towards?
Well, I thank you for the interview, and I just want to encourage everyone to take part in game jams. Those who just or just not even, you don't have to participate in game jams, but feel free to modify your own games, because this whole genre is really about putting yourself into these rules and into these games. So if you don't like something, just change it, and when you are confident about it, feel free to post it as a free TXT download, on any site. People should be encouraged to fill out the details for their games, I think.
Massive thanks to Menyush for the chat there. I really did enjoy speaking to him and learning not just about this game jam, but about his own hobby experiences too. And we actually continued the conversation. We did a little Q&A, which I've put over on the Patreon as well. So if you want access to that, along with all the other bonus content on there, then head on over to patreon.com/Bedroom Battlefields. Alright, that is just about it for this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll chat again on the next one.